Hell's Angel saves a terrified young girl being chased. The truth leaves him speechless. The rain came down hard on Millfield that Tuesday afternoon. It swept across the old highway in thick gray sheets, turning the road dark and slick. The trees along Route 9 bent low under the weight of the wind. Puddles spread wide across the gravel shoulders, and the whole town seemed to pull inward, like it was trying to stay dry. Jack Morrison didn't mind the rain. He steered his motorcycle through the center of Millfield at an easy pace, his big hands relaxed on the handlebars. Water ran off the brim of his helmet and dripped from the cuffs of his jacket. The engine rumbled low and steady beneath him, a familiar sound that had kept him company across thousands of miles of empty road. He was 45 years old and had been riding most of his life. Rain was just rain. The town moved past him slowly. A woman walking with groceries glanced up from under her umbrella. She saw the motorcycle first. Then she saw the vest, the bold patch on the back, the ink crawling up both sides of his neck. Her eyes dropped fast, and she looked away, pulling her bag a little closer. A man standing outside the hardware store watched him pass with narrowed eyes. Two teenagers on the corner stopped talking and stared until he was half a block gone. Before you continue listening, please, let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Jack noticed all of it. He always did. He had spent more years than he could count being looked at that way, like he was something to be careful around, something dangerous that wandered in off the highway. People saw the leather, the patches, the tattoos that covered his arms and climbed toward his jaw, and they made up their minds before he ever said a word. He had stopped being angry about it a long time ago. Now it just sat there, quiet and familiar, like an old ache in a healed-up bone. He pulled into the gravel lot, outside Martha's Diner, and cut the engine. The sign above the door was the old kind, white letters on a brown board, with a light inside that buzzed faintly in the wet air. A little painted coffee cup sat beside the words, chipped at the edges from years of weather. The place had been on Route 9 since before Jack was born. He had started stopping here about 2 years back, whenever his route brought him through Millfield. It wasn't fancy. That was exactly why he liked it. He pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through his damp, gray-streaked hair, and walked inside. The warmth hit him first. Then the smell of coffee and something sweet baking in the back. The diner was quiet for a Tuesday. A few booths were taken. A couple at a table near the window. Two older men at the counter with their mugs. A young woman typing on a laptop in the corner, earbuds in, head down. Every single one of them looked up when he walked through the door. He felt it the way you feel the sun go behind a cloud. The little shift. The way conversations paused and eyes moved, and bodies stiffened just slightly. He was used to it. Still, it landed the same way it always did, somewhere low and quiet in his chest. He moved to the booth at the far end of the diner. His booth, not because anyone had said so, but because it was out of the way and the seat faced the door. Old habit. He settled in, unzipped his jacket, and stacked his helmet on the bench beside him. Martha's granddaughter came over without being asked. She was about 17, a little shy, but she had learned that he always ordered the same thing. Coffee, black, a slice of whatever pie was fresh that day. She wrote it down anyway and hustled back to the kitchen without meeting his eyes. He wrapped both hands around the mug when it came and let the warmth soak into his palms. The rain tapped against the windows. The older men at the counter murmured something to each other. The couple near the window shared a plate of fries without speaking. Jack watched all of it the way he always did, quietly, from a distance. That was when he noticed the little girl. She was tucked into a chair near the back hallway, just past the restroom sign. Small, maybe 5 years old. Dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails. She had a paper placemat in front of her and a red crayon in her hand, but she wasn't coloring. She was just holding it, her small fingers tight around it, her eyes moving toward the hallway door every few seconds. Something about the way she kept looking at that door made Jack slow his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. She wasn't playing. She wasn't bored. Her little shoulders were pulled up close to her ears, and her feet, too short to reach the floor, were pressed flat together, like she was ready to jump up and run. Jack set his mug down. He looked at the hallway door. Nothing there. He looked back at the girl. She was frightened. He was sure of it. He just didn't know why. Jack took a slow bite of pie. The filling was cherry, warm and just sweet enough, with a crust that crumbled soft at the edges. On another day, he might have savored it more. Right now, his eyes kept drifting back to the little girl at the end of the room. She had picked up her crayon and put it down again. Picked it up. Put it down. Her placemat had a maze printed on it, the kind diners gave kids to keep them busy. She hadn't touched it. The red crayon sat sideways across the paper, like she had forgotten it was there. A woman at the counter laughed at something the older man beside her said. The sound filled the diner for a moment, warm and easy. The little girl flinched. Jack noticed. He lifted his coffee and took a slow sip. Over the rim of the mug, he watched her turn and look at the hallway door again. It was the fourth time in maybe 3 minutes. He had been counting without meaning to. Her eyes would go to the door, stay there a beat, then drop back to the table. Her small mouth was pressed into a tight line. Nobody else was paying her any attention. The couple by the window had moved on to dessert. The 2 men at the counter were deep in conversation about something to do with a tractor. Martha's granddaughter was wiping down the far end of the counter with a white cloth, moving slowly, humming something quiet under her breath. The girl reached up and tugged one of her pigtails. The rubber band was loose, and the pigtail had started to droop near her ear. She pulled it tighter with careful fingers, like she needed something to do with her hands. Then she looked at the hallway door again. Jack set his mug down softly. He leaned back in the booth and let out a slow breath through his nose. He had spent years learning how to read rooms. The army had sharpened that skill early, and the road had kept it sharp. There were looks that meant nothing and looks that meant something. The girl's look meant something. She was waiting for that door to open, and she did not want it to. He turned his attention back to his plate and cut another piece of pie with the side of his fork. He ate it, tasted nothing. A man walked out of the back hallway. Jack glanced up. The man was somewhere in his late 30s. Medium build, dark jacket. He had the look of someone searching a room quickly, eyes moving from table to table. The little girl saw him. Her whole body went rigid. She slid off her chair fast, so fast the chair scraped against the floor with a sharp sound that made the woman at the counter look up for just a second. The girl pressed herself flat against the wall beside the restroom sign. Her eyes were wide. Her chin was trembling. The man hadn't spotted her yet. He turned the other way, looking toward the front of the diner. Jack sat very still. The girl made her decision in an instant. She pushed off the wall and ran. She came down the center of the diner at a full sprint, her sneakers slapping hard against the tile, her pigtails flying. Tears were already streaking down her face. She was crying without making much sound, the way kids do when they are too scared to even let the sound out properly. The man spun around the moment she moved. "Hey!" His voice came out sharp. He started after her, closing the distance fast, his hand reaching forward. Every head in the diner turned. The girl was nearly at the front door. Jack was already on his feet. He didn't think about it. There was no moment of weighing it out or talking himself into it. His body just moved, the way it had always moved when something was wrong and someone needed help. He stepped clear of his booth and planted himself in the center of the aisle, directly between the man and the door. Between the man and the girl. He stood there, big and still, and he did not move. The diner went completely silent. Not the kind of quiet that settles gradually, where noise fades one sound at a time. This was sudden, total. like someone had pressed a button and shut everything off at once. The woman at the counter stopped mid-laugh. The two men talking about tractors turned on their stools. Martha's granddaughter stopped wiping and held the cloth still against the counter, watching. The only sound was the rain against the windows. And Emily's breathing, fast and ragged, right behind Jack's back. She had found him the way a small animal finds a tree in a storm. She hit the back of his legs hard, grabbed 2 fistfuls of his leather vest, and pressed her face between his shoulder blades. He could feel her shaking. Her little hands twisted the leather tight, holding on like she was afraid the floor might tilt and slide her away. Jack kept his eyes on the man. The man had stopped about 4 feet back. His chest was rising and falling fast from the chase. He was taller up close, with dark circles under his eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days. His dark jacket was damp at the shoulders from the rain. He looked tired in a deep way. Not sleepy tired, but worn down tired, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. He stared at Jack. Jack stared back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Behind Jack, Emily made a small sound. Half a sob, quickly swallowed. The man's eyes dropped to where her small hands clutched the back of the vest. Something moved across his face. Pain, maybe, or something close to it. "Sir." His voice came out tighter than he probably wanted it to. He steadied it, tried again. "Sir, that is my daughter." Jack did not move. The man at the counter with the tractor conversation had risen slowly from his stool. He was broad across the shoulders with thick forearms and the patient expression of someone who had handled disputes before. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, making it clear he was paying attention. The woman at the window booth had her phone out. Her thumb hovered over it. "Everybody just hold on." Martha's voice came from behind the counter, steady and calm, the way she said everything. She had appeared from the kitchen doorway without anyone noticing. She stood with both hands flat on the counter and looked at the man in the dark jacket. "Why don't you say what you need to say? Nice and easy." The man nodded once. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, moving deliberately, keeping his hands visible. He pulled out a folded envelope, the kind that had been opened and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. He held it out toward Jack. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said. "Emily is my daughter. I have legal paperwork right here. Custody documentation. A judge signed it 4 days ago." Jack looked at the envelope. He didn't take it yet. "I'm not here to hurt her," Daniel said. His voice cracked slightly at the edges. He pressed through it. "I know what this looks like. I understand why you stepped in. But I promise you, I am her father." Jack reached out slowly and took the envelope. He unfolded the papers with one hand, keeping his body turned so Emily stayed behind him. The documents were real-looking. Official letterhead. A court stamp near the bottom of the first page. A judge's signature in blue ink. Emily Carter was printed clearly in the middle of the page. Below it, Daniel Carter. Father. Jack read it a second time. He looked up at the man. Daniel's eyes were red at the rims. His jaw was set, but his hands, now empty, hung open at his sides in a way that looked less like threat and more like exhaustion. "She won't come with me," Daniel said quietly, almost to himself. "She keeps running, and I don't know how to make her understand that I'm not going to hurt her." Behind Jack, Emily's grip on his vest tightened one small notch more. Martha came around the counter without rushing. She moved the way she always moved, with the calm certainty of someone who had seen most things life had to offer and had decided long ago that falling apart didn't help anyone. She picked up a clean dish towel, folded it once, and set it on the counter. "All right," she said. "Nobody needs an audience." She looked at Jack, then at Daniel, then at the small pair of hands still knotted into the back of Jack's vest. "There's a booth in the back corner," she said. "Private enough. I'll bring coffee." She glanced at the rest of the diner, with a look that was polite, but clear. "The rest of you have got food getting cold." The man at the counter sat back down. The woman with the phone lowered it. Conversation started back up slowly, the way water finds its level again after something has disturbed it. Jack reached back carefully with one hand. He didn't grab Emily or pull her. He just turned his palm upward, open, and waited. After a moment, one small hand uncurled from his vest and took it. They walked to the back corner booth together. Daniel followed, 3 steps behind, quiet. The booth was tucked beside a window that looked out over the wet parking lot. Rain ran down the glass in thin, crooked lines. Martha brought 3 mugs without being asked and filled them from a pot that smelled strong and good. She set a small glass of orange juice on the table without comment, the kind that came in a little plastic cup with a foil lid. She placed it in front of the space nearest to Emily. Emily sat pressed against the wall, as far from Daniel as the booth would allow. She had stopped crying, but her eyes were still swollen, and her chin had that tight, determined look that some children get when they are trying very hard not to cry again. She did not look at her father. Daniel wrapped both hands around his mug and stared at the table for a moment before he spoke. "Her mother and I separated 3 years ago," he said. His voice was low, not quite a whisper, but close. "It wasn't good between us for a long time before that. When Sarah and I split, the custody arrangement went sideways. There were hearings. A lot of hearings." He paused. "I kept asking for time with Emily, and I kept getting told to wait." Jack listened without speaking. "I missed her first day of school," Daniel said. "I missed her 4th birthday. Not because I wanted to. Because I was told I had to wait for the process." He turned the mug slowly between his palms. "Last week, a judge finally ruled that I had the right to visitation. Supervised at first. Just a few hours." He looked at the envelope on the table between them. Today was supposed to be the first time. Jack looked at Emily. She was staring at her orange juice. She hadn't touched it. Her feet didn't reach the floor, and they swung slightly, back and forth, the way little kids' feet do when they are sitting in grown-up seats. "She doesn't know me," Daniel said. He said it plainly, the way you say something that hurts too much to dress up. "Not really. She was 2 when things fell apart. I'm basically a stranger to her." Jack turned that over slowly. He looked at Daniel's face. There was something there that was hard to fake. A tiredness that went past being tired. A kind of grief that had been sitting in a person long enough to settle into the bones. Jack had seen that look in the mirror before, in the years after he'd lost his sister. He recognized it the way you recognize weather. He looked back at Emily. She still wasn't looking at her father. Her small jaw was set. Her hands were flat on the seat on either side of her, like she was bracing. Daniel reached across the table gently. "Emily," he said softly, "I just want to talk." She turned her face toward the rain-blurred window and said nothing at all. Martha came back a few minutes later with a small plate, 2 chocolate chip cookies, and a little paper cup of apple slices, arranged neatly like she'd thought about it. She set it in front of Emily without making a big deal of it. No fuss, no baby talk. Just set it down and gave the girl a soft look before walking away. Emily stared at the plate. She didn't touch it right away, but after a moment her eyes moved from the cookies to the apple slices and back again with the quiet, careful attention of someone making a very important decision. She picked up a cookie. Jack noticed but didn't say anything. He sipped his coffee and looked out the rain-streaked window. He wasn't trying to push. He had learned a long time ago that you couldn't rush a scared animal or a scared person. You just had to stay still and let them figure out you weren't a threat. Daniel was talking again, quietly, about the custody paperwork. Something about dates and a courthouse in the next county over. Jack half listened. Mostly he was paying attention to the small person on his left. Emily finished the cookie. She picked up an apple slice. She chewed slowly and looked around the diner the way kids do when they are pretending not to be listening to something. Then she looked at Jack. He met her eyes, didn't smile too big, didn't say anything yet. just looked back at her in a calm, steady way. "You're really tall," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I get that a lot." She looked at his arms. The tattoos covered most of both of them. Eagles and gears and old faded designs he'd gotten in places he barely remembered. "Do those hurt?" she asked. "Getting them did," he said. "Not anymore." She seemed to think about that seriously. "I had a shot once, and it hurt for 2 whole days," she said. "That's rough," he said. "I didn't cry, though," she added quickly. "That's pretty brave," he said, and he meant it. Something in her face shifted, just slightly. The way a door moves when someone on the other side finally puts their hand on the knob. She looked at the tattoo on his forearm, an eagle with its wings spread wide. She pointed at it without quite touching it. "What's that one?" "An eagle," he said. He turned his arm a little so she could see it better. "Eagles are brave," she said. "They are. My teacher told us they fly even in storms." She looked up at him. "Is that true?" "Yeah," he said. "It is. While most birds land and hide, eagles fly up above the storm." She nodded, like that confirmed something she had already suspected. Daniel had gone quiet. He was watching his daughter talk to this enormous tattooed stranger with an expression that was hard to read. Something between relief and heartbreak all mixed together. Emily ate another apple slice. The rain tapped steadily against the glass. The diner hummed with the low sound of other conversations and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Then, Emily put her apple slice down. She looked up at Jack with an expression that had changed. The shy curiosity was still there, but underneath it was something else now. Something more serious than a 5-year-old's face usually carried. She glanced toward the front of the diner, then toward the kitchen, quick and careful, like she was checking. Then she reached down. She grabbed the heel of her sneaker and pulled it off. Reached inside with 2 small fingers, pulled out a folded piece of paper that had been bent and creased like it had been there for a while. She held it out to Jack. She didn't offer it to Daniel. She didn't call Martha over. She held it to Jack specifically, with both hands, the way you offer something very important to the one person you have decided you can trust. Jack took it. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was big and uneven, the way a child's writing looks when they are trying their absolute hardest. It read, "The man near the kitchen said something bad is going to happen. Please help." Jack stared at the note. He read it again. Then he looked at Emily. She looked straight back at him, small and serious, and completely certain that she had given it to exactly the right person. Jack was speechless. Jack folded the note carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. He kept his face calm. That was important. He had learned in the army that panic spreads fast, like a spark in dry grass. The last thing he needed was for the whole diner to know something was wrong. He leaned down a little, so he was closer to Emily's level. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Where were you when you heard the man talking?" She pointed toward the back hallway, the narrow corridor that ran alongside the kitchen toward the restrooms. "I was hiding," she said, keeping her voice low like she understood without being told that this was a quiet conversation. "From your dad?" Jack asked gently. She nodded again. "I went back there and sat behind the big shelf, the one with the mop and stuff." Jack nodded. He knew the spot. A metal shelving unit stood just outside the kitchen door. He had walked past it on the way to the restroom earlier. "And you heard 2 men talking?" he asked. "One man was on the phone," she said. "He was talking really quiet, but I could still hear because he was close." "What did he look like?" Emily thought about it. "He had nice hair," she said. "Like a dad on TV, and a striped shirt, blue stripes." Jack filed that away. "What did he say?" Jack asked. "Do you remember?" She chewed her lip, thinking hard. "He said something was already done, and nobody would know. And then he said something about the gas And about the money. She paused. He said a number. A really big number. How big? She held up her hands like she was describing the size of something enormous. Like 1 million or something. I don't know. It was a lot of zeros. Did he say anything else? He said nobody gets hurt. She frowned a little. But he was laughing when he said it, like it was funny. She looked up at Jack. That's what scared me, because my mom laughs like that sometimes when she says things she doesn't mean. Jack looked at her for a moment, 5 years old, and she understood that a laugh could be a lie. He straightened up slowly. Daniel was watching from across the booth, reading the situation, wisely staying quiet. You did good, Jack told Emily. You did real good. He excused himself from the booth, casual, easy, like a man getting up to stretch his legs. He walked toward the back hallway. The kitchen sounds grew louder as he got closer, the hiss of the grill, the clank of pans. He moved past the restroom door and stopped near the shelving unit Emily had described. He didn't have to wait long. 2 voices drifted through the narrow gap where the kitchen door sat slightly open. One voice was smooth, relaxed, the kind of voice that was used to being trusted. Relax, the smooth voice said. The line's been compromised since yesterday. All it needs is a little heat, and it handles itself. By the time the fire marshal finishes his report, the payout is already processing. A second voice, lower and rougher. And nobody's going to trace it back? To what? The first man said. A faulty gas line in an old building. These things happen. Martha files the claim, collects the insurance, rebuilds. Everybody wins. Except Martha. The rough voice muttered. A short laugh. Empty and flat. Martha doesn't know what she's winning yet. Jack's jaw tightened. He had heard enough. He turned and moved back through the hallway with long, quiet strides. His mind was running through the layout of the diner, the kitchen, the back wall, the number of people sitting at tables right now. He came around the corner and found Martha behind the counter, refilling a coffee pot. He stepped close and kept his voice low and even. Martha, he said, I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. She looked up at him. Something in his eyes made her set the coffee pot down immediately. What is it? She asked. Martha didn't ask questions. That was the thing about her. Jack had barely finished his second sentence when she was already untying her apron. How bad? She asked. Bad enough, Jack said. Gas line near the kitchen. Someone tampered with it. Her face went pale, but her hands stayed steady. She moved first to the kitchen door and pushed it open just far enough to speak to her cook. Bobby, she said, her voice calm like she was telling him the soup needed more salt. Turn everything off. Every burner. Right now. Then get yourself and the others out the back. Bobby looked at her face and didn't argue. Martha turned back to Jack. I'll handle the customers, she said quietly. Nice and easy. Jack nodded. I'll get the family. He moved back to the booth, where Daniel sat watching Emily color something on a paper napkin. She had borrowed a pen from Martha, and was completely focused, her little tongue poking out the side of her mouth. Jack crouched beside the table. We need to go outside, he said. Simple. Direct. All 3 of us. Right now. Daniel looked at him sharply. What happened? I'll explain outside. Daniel didn't push. He slid out of the booth and offered Emily his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at Jack. Jack gave her a small nod. She took her father's hand. The 3 of them moved toward the front door while Martha worked the room behind them. Jack could hear her gentle voice floating through the diner. Folks, I'm going to have to ask everyone to step outside for just a few minutes. We've got a small issue with the heating system. Nothing to worry about. You're welcome to take your coffee with you. She said it so smoothly that people simply stood up and gathered their things. A few grumbled. Most didn't. Outside, the rain had softened to a light mist. Jack guided Daniel and Emily to the far edge of the parking lot, well away from the building. He looked back through the diner windows and did a quick count as customers filtered out. That was when he noticed the man in the blue, striped shirt. He was moving along the side of the building, not toward the parking lot, not toward the group of customers standing on the gravel. He was moving along the wall toward the road, quick and quiet, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and didn't want anyone to notice. Jack watched him reach a silver car parked half behind the tree line at the edge of the lot. The door opened. The door closed. The engine started. And just like that, the man was gone. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. He kept it short and factual. Gas leak. Possible tampered line. Roadside diner on Route 9. People are already outside. He hung up and looked at Daniel. "The man Emily heard," Jack said. "He just drove away." Daniel's expression hardened. The fire trucks arrived in under 10 minutes. 2 of them. The firefighters moved fast, pulling gear, shouting to each other across the lot. One team pushed into the front of the diner with equipment, while another circled around the back. Martha stood near Jack with her arms crossed. Her eyes never left the building she had run for 31 years. Then it happened. A deep, heavy thump from somewhere inside the kitchen. A flash of orange lit up the small frosted window above the back door. Just for a second, like something had exhaled a breath of fire and then thought better of it. A firefighter appeared at the front door. "Line's been compromised on the back wall," he called out. "You got here just in time." Martha let out a long breath. She didn't cry. She just reached over and put her hand on Jack's arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. It was almost 2 hours later when a pair of headlights swung into the parking lot, and a small blue car parked crookedly near the edge of the gravel. The door flew open before the engine was even off. Sarah Carter looked like someone had called her with the worst news of her life, and she had driven the whole way there, holding her breath. Her hair was damp from the mist, and her eyes were wide and red at the edges. She found Emily first. She dropped to her knees right there on the wet gravel and pulled her daughter into her arms so tight that Emily made a small sound of surprise. "I'm okay, Mama," Emily said into her shoulder. Sarah pulled back and held Emily's face in both hands, looking her over, checking, making sure. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know." She stood slowly. Her eyes moved to Jack, then to Daniel, then back to Jack. A fire truck was still parked near the entrance, its lights sweeping red and white across the wet lot. "They told me what she did," Sarah said. "The note." Her voice broke a little on the last word. "She wrote a note." "She did," Jack said. Sarah shook her head slowly, like she couldn't quite believe the little girl standing beside her was the same child who had quietly saved a room full of people. Then something shifted in her expression. The relief folded inward and became something darker. "Vince was here," she said. It wasn't a question. Jack nodded. Her hand moved to her mouth. "If he thinks Emily heard him." She stopped, started again. "He doesn't leave loose ends. That's how he is. That's how he has always been, and I just didn't want to see it." She looked at Jack like she was trying to decide if she had any right to ask what she was about to ask. "Will you help us?" she said quietly. Jack looked at Emily. The little girl was watching him with those steady brown eyes, still holding the paper napkin she had been coloring in the booth, like she had carried it through all of it. He looked back at Sarah. "Yeah," he said. "I will." Daniel exhaled beside him. Martha had already arranged for a few of the regulars to lock up the building for the night. She walked over and handed Emily a small paper bag. "Cookies," she said, "for the road." Emily hugged her without being asked. Martha looked at Jack over the top of the little girl's head and gave him a slow nod, the kind that said more than words could. The group moved toward their vehicles. The emergency lights kept sweeping across the parking lot in long, slow arcs of red and white. Jack zipped his vest against the mist and looked back at the diner one more time. The old building was still standing. So were the people who mattered. He pulled on his helmet, swung his leg over his bike, and followed the taillights out of the lot. Sarah's house was small and warm. A yellow porch light cut through the mist as Jack rolled his bike to a stop at the curb. Daniel parked behind him. Sarah was already at the front door, keys jingling in her hand. Inside, the living room smelled like laundry detergent and something faintly sweet. Crayons were scattered across the coffee table. A stuffed rabbit sat propped against the couch cushion, like it had been waiting all day for Emily to come home. Emily walked straight to it and picked it up. Sarah filled a kettle in the kitchen. Jack stood near the door. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to sit down or stay standing. He wasn't used to being in places like this. Small homes with soft rugs and family photos on the walls. Daniel sat on the edge of the armchair, his elbows on his knees, his hands folded. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Sarah came back in and looked at Daniel across the room. The look between them was careful, like two people walking across the same thin ice from opposite sides. "You should have called me the second you found her," Sarah said. Her voice was controlled, but tight at the edges. "I tried," Daniel said. "Twice." Sarah's jaw moved. She didn't answer that. Jack cleared his throat. "The man in the diner, Vince. How long has he been around?" Sarah sat down on the couch. She folded her hands in her lap. 7 months. "He ever seem nervous? Mention money problems?" She shook her head slowly, then stopped. "He had phone calls he always took outside. I thought it was work." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't ask questions I should have asked." Emily was sitting on the floor between the couch and the table. Rabbit tucked under one arm, listening quietly. Kids her age weren't supposed to follow adult conversations that well. But her eyes moved from face to face, and she tracked every word. Daniel leaned forward. "The police need to know everything. What he told you, where he spent his time, anyone he talked about." "I know that," Sarah said. "I'm just saying it clearly." "I heard you, Daniel." The kettle whistled. Sarah went back to the kitchen. Daniel looked at Jack. Something passed between them. Not quite an apology. Not quite an understanding. Something in the middle. "She didn't know," Daniel said quietly. He wasn't defending her. He was just saying it. Jack nodded once. Sarah returned with 3 mugs. She set one near Daniel without looking at him. She handed one to Jack. He took it with both hands. The warmth felt good. Emily yawned. Sarah looked over at her. "Okay, baby. Time for bed." Emily stood up slowly. She hugged the rabbit. Then she walked over to Jack and stood in front of him. She looked up at him with those big, steady eyes. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. Jack looked at her. Such a small thing to ask. Such a simple sentence. But the way she said it made it feel like something heavier than it sounded. "You got other folks looking out for you," he said gently. Emily shook her head. "I want you to come." Sarah watched from the hallway. Daniel looked at the floor. Jack crouched down to her level. She smelled like crayon wax and the cookie Martha had given her. "You'll be safe tonight," he said. "I know," Emily said. "But will you come back tomorrow?" She wasn't scared. She wasn't crying. She was just asking. Plain and honest, the way only little kids can ask things. Jack looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "I'll check on you tomorrow." Emily nodded. Like that settled it. Then she turned and padded down the hallway toward her room. Jack stood back up. He set down the mug. He said a quiet good night to Sarah and Daniel and walked out to his bike. He sat on it for a moment without starting it. The porch light was still on behind him. He didn't know why that little girl's question was sitting so heavy in his chest. But it was. Jack woke before the sun came up. He lay flat on his back and stared at the ceiling of his small house on the edge of town. The room was dark. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and now everything outside was just quiet and still. He hadn't slept well. He rarely did. But last night was different. Every time he had closed his eyes, he kept seeing Emily's face, those steady brown eyes looking up at him. The way she had asked her question, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Will you come back tomorrow?" He rolled onto his side. The old mattress creaked under him. On the nightstand sat a small photograph in a cracked plastic frame. He looked at it the way he looked at it every morning. A worn habit, like checking the weather or making coffee. The photo was faded at the edges. Two kids standing in a yard somewhere. Summer by the look of it. Jack was maybe 10 years old, skinny and grinning, his arms slung around the shoulders of a little girl with pigtails and a gap in her front teeth. Her name was Lily. She had been 7 years old when it happened. A creek behind their grandmother's property. A warm Saturday afternoon. Jack had turned his back for less than 2 minutes. He had heard her laugh, and then he hadn't heard anything at all. He had carried that silence ever since. 35 years, and the weight of it had never gotten lighter. It had just become familiar, like a stone he had learned to carry in his chest. He sat up, put his feet on the floor. The wood was cold. He thought about how Emily had grabbed his vest in the diner, how she had pressed herself against him without knowing a single thing about him, without caring what patches were on his back, or what people said about men like him. She had just held on. He rubbed his face with both hands and stood up. By 9 in the morning, he was on the road. The air was cool and clean from the night's rain. Wet leaves were plastered flat against the asphalt, and the sky was the pale gray of old dishwater. His bike hummed steady under him. He told himself he was just checking in, like he had promised, just making sure the family was okay, and then he would go. Sarah's street was quiet. A few kids riding bikes at the far end, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence. He pulled up to the curb and cut the engine. Before he had even swung his leg off the bike, the front door opened. Emily came flying down the porch steps in her socks. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under one arm. She ran straight at him like she had somewhere urgent to be, and that somewhere was right where he was standing. "You came," she said. "Said I would," Jack replied. She beamed up at him, like he had done something remarkable just by showing up. Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was holding a mug of coffee and looked like she hadn't slept much either, but she managed a small, grateful smile. "Come on in." They were barely inside when Daniel's truck appeared at the curb. He parked and came up the walk with his hands in his jacket pockets. He gave Jack a nod. Jack nodded back. Inside, Sarah poured coffee without being asked. They sat around the small kitchen table. Emily climbed into the chair beside Jack and set her rabbit on the table facing her. There was a moment of quiet where no one was quite sure who should speak first. Then Daniel said, "Whatever happened between Sarah and me, none of that matters right now. What matters is Emily." Sarah looked across the table at him. Something in her face softened just slightly. "Agreed." Daniel looked at Jack. "We could use your help, if you're willing." Jack wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "I'm willing," he said. The park was just a few blocks from Sarah's house. It wasn't much. A set of swings, a small climbing structure with a yellow slide, a couple of wooden benches near a stretch of open grass. But the rain had washed everything clean, and the afternoon light was coming through the clouds in long, pale strips that made the wet grass look like it was glowing. Emily ran straight for the swings. Jack and Daniel followed at a slower pace. They walked a few feet apart, not quite side by side. The silence between them was not unfriendly. It was just two men who were still figuring out the shape of things. They sat on the bench nearest the swings. Daniel leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Jack stretched his legs out and watched Emily climb onto the seat and start pumping her legs. For a while, neither man said anything. They just watched her swing higher and higher, her socks still on, because she had forgotten her shoes by the door. Then, Emily dragged her feet to slow herself down. She looked over at Jack with that focused expression she sometimes got, like she was solving something in her head. "Mr. Reaper," she said. "Yeah. What's that one say?" She pointed at his forearm, at the faded eagle inked there in black and dark blue. Jack looked down at it. "It's an eagle." "Why an eagle?" "Got it when I left the army. Felt right at the time." She studied it seriously. "Did it hurt?" "A little." She considered that. "I don't think I would like that," she decided. Then she pointed again. "What about that one?" On the inside of his wrist, there was a small set of wings. Simple. Worn with age. Jack was quiet for a second. "That one's for somebody I lost a long time ago." Emily looked at his face when he said it. She didn't ask who. She just nodded slowly, like she understood that some answers were big and needed room. She went back to swinging. Daniel glanced over at Jack, but didn't say anything either. After a while, Emily slowed herself down again. "Is your motorcycle very loud?" she asked. "Pretty loud, yeah." "Louder than thunder?" Jack thought about it. "About the same, maybe." Her eyes went wide, like that was the most impressive thing she had ever heard. "Can you make it go really, really fast?" "I can." "Have you ever fallen off?" "Once or twice." "Did it hurt?" "Yeah," he said simply. "It did." She seemed satisfied by the honest answer. She kicked off again, swinging high, her pigtails lifting behind her. Daniel let out a quiet breath beside Jack. Not quite a laugh, more like something loosening. They stayed at the park until the lights started to change and the air got cooler. Emily ran across the grass, chasing a fat pigeon that wanted nothing to do with her. She came back breathless and grass-stained and happy. They walked back to Sarah's house, slowly. Emily held Jack's hand without asking if it was okay. She just reached up and took it, and he let her. And that was that. Sarah had dinner ready by the time they got back. After they ate and the plates were cleared, Emily started to get sleepy. She was sitting beside Jack on the couch, leaning slowly sideways until her head was resting against his arm. Her voice came out small and soft, the way voices do just before sleep pulls a person under. "Mr. Reaper," she murmured. You look kind of scary." "I know," he said quietly. She was still for a moment. Then she said, "But I feel safe with you." Jack didn't say anything back. He couldn't quite find the words. He just sat very still and let that sentence settle over him like something warm. He drove home alone an hour later, under a sky full of cold stars. The engine hummed, the road was empty, and Jack Morrison, who had spent the better part of 45 years believing he had nothing left to offer anybody, rode through the dark, carrying feelings he hadn't felt in a very long time. The detective's name was Reyes. She was a small woman, with dark hair, pulled back tight, and a calm, steady voice that didn't rush anything. She sat across from Emily, at Sarah's kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, and a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched yet. Jack stood near the back wall with his arms crossed. Daniel sat beside Sarah. Nobody had slept much. Reyes had explained before they started that Emily didn't have to answer anything that felt too hard. She said it simply and gently, like she meant it. Emily had nodded and sat up very straight in her chair, the way she always did when she was trying to be brave. "Can you tell me what you heard?" Reyes asked. "In your own words. Take your time." Emily folded her hands on the table. She thought for a second. Then she said, "The man with the nice shoes was talking to another man by the kitchen, near the back door." "What did the man with the nice shoes look like?" "He had brown hair and a blue shirt. He smelled like that spray stuff." She wrinkled her nose. "Like too much of it." Reyes wrote something down. "And what did you hear them say?" Emily's forehead creased. "The other man said something about the pipes. And the man with the nice shoes said it was fine." That it needed to happen. She paused. He said after it happened, they would get a lot of money. Reyes nodded slowly. What did you do when you heard that? I went to the bathroom, and I wrote the note. Emily said it plainly. Like it was obvious. Like, of course, that was what you did. Sarah pressed her fingers to her mouth. Reyes looked at Emily for a moment. That was a very smart thing to do, she said. Very brave. Emily thought about that. I was scared, she admitted. Being scared and still doing the right thing, Reyes said. That's what brave is. Emily considered that carefully. Then she gave a small nod, like she was filing it away. The interview didn't last long. Reyes asked a few more questions about the layout of the hallway and whether Emily had seen anyone else near the kitchen. Emily answered everything she could. Her memory was sharp and clean in the way children's memories sometimes are, full of small specific details that adults walk right past. When it was over, Reyes stepped outside with Jack and Daniel, while Sarah stayed inside with Emily. The morning was cool and gray. A few birds were moving through the yard. She's a good witness, Reyes said. Clear, consistent. What about Vince? Daniel asked. Reyes's expression stayed neutral. Still no location on Mallory. His apartment was cleared out. Car is gone. She paused. He had time during the evacuation. We're working on it. Jack said nothing. He looked out across the yard. We're taking it seriously, Reyes added. She looked at them both. Make sure she's not left alone. Keep the routine as normal as you can. That afternoon, a second detective came by. His name was Briggs. Older, tired-looking. He had a folder tucked under his arm, and he set it on the kitchen table and opened it without much ceremony. We ran Mallory's name through our system, he said, and connected with 2 other counties. Daniel leaned forward. What does that mean? Briggs tapped the folder. It means the diner wasn't the first time. He laid out several printed pages, reports, business names, dates going back almost 3 years. Gas lines, faulty wiring, sprinkler failures. 3 separate businesses filed major insurance claims in the past 30 months. 2 of them had Mallory listed as a contractor or consultant. Sarah stared at the papers. He's done this before. Looks that way, Briggs said. We're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars across multiple schemes. This is bigger than a single diner. He looked around the table. A lot bigger. The kitchen went quiet. Jack stared at the papers spread across the table and felt the weight of it settle in the room around all of them. The mediation office was on the 2nd floor of a gray building downtown. Daniel held the door open for Sarah without thinking about it. She walked through without saying thank you. Then she stopped in the hallway and looked back at him. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded once. They rode the elevator up in silence. Jack sat on Sarah's back porch with Emily beside him. She had a box of sidewalk chalk, and she was sorting through the colors with great seriousness, holding each one up to the morning light before either accepting or rejecting it. This one's broken, she said, holding up a stub of yellow. Broken things still work, Jack said. Emily looked at the chalk. Then she looked at him. Then she set the yellow piece in the keep pile. They went down to the small concrete patio below the porch steps. Emily drew a house first, then a sun with too many rays coming off it, then a motorcycle that was mostly a rectangle with 2 circles under it. Is that mine? Jack asked. Yes, she said. It needs more pipes. Pipes, he said, smiling a little. Sure. She handed him a piece of blue chalk. He crouched down and added pipes. He was not a good artist. Emily studied his work and seemed to accept it anyway. She drew a person standing next to the motorcycle. The person was very tall and had small squares up and down both arms. Those your tattoos? He asked. Yes. She drew another smaller person beside the tall one. That's me. Jack looked at the 2 figures standing side by side on the concrete. Something moved through his chest, quiet and warm, and a little painful at the same time. You're a good artist, he said. Emily beamed. They ate lunch inside. Grilled cheese and tomato soup from a can. Emily insisted the soup needed crackers. Jack found crackers in the cabinet and crushed some into her bowl without being asked. She seemed to consider this proof that he understood how things should be done. After lunch, she fell asleep on the couch with a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Jack sat in the chair across from her and watched the afternoon light move slow and easy across the floor. He thought about the folder Briggs had left on the table the day before. The dates, the business names, 3 years of it. He thought about Vince's face, the way he had slipped out during the evacuation like smoke through a crack, like he had practiced disappearing. Jack didn't like that thought. He set it aside. Sarah and Daniel got back around 5. Daniel looked tired but steady. Sarah looked like she had been carrying something heavy all day and had only just set it down. They had not argued, she told Jack later, which surprised her. Daniel said goodbye to Emily and left just after 6. Emily stood at the window and watched his car until it turned the corner. Jack stayed to help with dinner. He didn't plan to. It just happened. Afterward, when Emily was in bed and the dishes were done, Sarah poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "I should have seen it," she said. Jack was drying a pan. He didn't respond right away. "The signs were there," Sarah continued. Her voice was steady but thin. "I just didn't want to see them." She lowered her gaze and looked at the glass in her hand. "I was lonely, and he was nice to me at first, attentive. He made me feel like I wasn't doing everything alone." She shook her head slowly. "I let that matter too much." Jack set the pan down. "I put her in danger," Sarah said. "My own daughter." She didn't cry. She just stood there with the weight of it sitting plain on her face. Jack looked at her. Not at someone careless. Not at someone foolish. He saw a woman who had made a very human mistake for a very human reason, and who was now carrying it without excuses. "You're seeing it now," he said simply. Sarah looked at him. "That counts for something," he said. The truck smelled like pine air freshener and old coffee. Daniel had a thermos wedged between the seats and a tackle box in the bed that rattled every time they hit a bump. Emily sat between Jack and Daniel on the bench seat, her feet not quite reaching the floor. She was wearing rain boots, yellow ones with small frogs on the sides. Jack had not owned a fishing rod in 20 years. Daniel had brought an extra one without making a big deal about it. He just handed it to Jack when they loaded up and said, "Hope that grip works for you." And that was that. They drove out past the edge of town, where the road got quiet and the trees crowded close on both sides. The morning light came through the leaves in long, broken pieces. Emily watched it with her forehead pressed against the window. "Are there big fish?" she asked. "Some," Daniel said. "How big?" Daniel held his hands about a foot apart. Emily stared at the gap between his hands. "That's not very big." "Well," Daniel said, "maybe bigger." "Mr. Reaper," Emily said, turning to Jack, "have you ever caught a really big fish?" "Once," Jack said. She waited. "It got away," he said. She thought about this. "That's sad." "A little," he agreed. The lake was small and still. A wooden dock stretched out about 20 feet over the water. Cattails grew thick along the bank. A great blue heron stood motionless near the reeds like it had been placed there. Emily spotted the heron immediately and grabbed Jack's sleeve. She pointed but didn't speak. She seemed to understand without being told that loud noises were not welcome at a lake in the early morning. Daniel set up the rods while Jack helped Emily bait her hook. She was brave about the worm, which he respected. They settled on the dock, the three of them in a row with their lines in the water. The sun was still low and soft. Somewhere back in the trees, a bird was singing the same 4 notes over and over. For a long time, nobody said much. That was the good kind of quiet. Jack knew the difference. There was the quiet that sat between strangers who had nothing to say. And then there was this kind. the kind that meant something had been accepted without anyone needing to put it into words. Emily caught a small bluegill about an hour in. She shrieked happily when it came up out of the water, and the heron lifted off and disappeared over the tree line. Daniel helped her hold it while Jack unhooked it carefully. "Can we keep him?" Emily asked. "He's got a family," Jack said. Emily considered this with great seriousness. Then she leaned over the edge of the dock and lowered her hands to the water. The fish flicked its tail and was gone. She watched the rings spread out across the surface. "Bye," she said softly. Around noon, Daniel unpacked sandwiches from a cooler. Peanut butter and honey cut in triangles. He handed one to Jack, without asking if he wanted it. Jack ate it and didn't say anything except that it was good. Emily fell asleep on the folded blanket Daniel had brought, her rod propped carefully beside her, her yellow boots still on. Daniel and Jack fished side by side in the afternoon quiet. At one point, Daniel said, "She talks about you, like you've known each other for years." "She talks a lot," Jack said. Daniel smiled at the water. "Yeah, she does." The sun was dropping by the time they loaded the truck. The lake had gone gold, and the air had cooled. Emily was tired and leaning against Jack's arm on the walk back. Daniel closed the tailgate and stood there for a moment with his hands resting on it. "Jack," he said. Jack looked over. Daniel's jaw worked for a second, like he was choosing the right words carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did in that diner, for stepping in front of her." He paused. "I wasn't there. You were. And she's safe because of it." Jack held his gaze. "She saved herself," he said. "I just got in the way." Daniel shook his head. "Don't do that." Jack looked down at Emily, who had wrapped her small hand around two of his fingers without thinking about it. "She's a good kid," Jack said quietly. "Yeah," Daniel said. His voice was rough around the edges. "She really is." They stood there together in the fading light. Two men who had started as strangers on opposite sides of a tense moment in a diner. Now standing at a tailgate by a lake, tired and sunburned and connected by one small sleeping girl, who had trusted both of them completely. Daniel put out his hand. Jack looked at it. Then he shook it. The story got out faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, the Millfield Gazette had run a front-page piece with the headline, "Local Girl's Hidden Note Saves Diner from Disaster." By Tuesday, 2 regional papers had picked it up. By Wednesday, a news van from the city had driven through town and parked outside Martha's Diner for most of the afternoon. Jack heard about it from his neighbor Carl, who knocked on his door early Wednesday, holding the Gazette like it was something precious. "You're in here," Carl said, holding up the paper. Jack looked at it through the screen door. There was a photo. It was grainy and taken from a distance. Probably someone's phone, but it was clearly him. He was kneeling beside Emily outside the diner under the emergency lights. His leather vest, his tattoos, his big scarred hands held carefully at his side so he wouldn't frighten her. Emily was looking up at him like he hung the moon. Jack said. "You're a hero," Carl said. Jack took the paper. He told Carl he appreciated it. Then he went back inside and set it on the kitchen table and stared at it while his coffee got cold. Going into town felt different that week. Jack rode his motorcycle down Main Street on Thursday morning, the same way he always did. Same speed, same route, same everything. But people looked at him differently. A man outside the hardware store raised a hand in a wave. Jack was so surprised he almost didn't wave back. A woman he had never spoken to in his life smiled at him from the sidewalk outside the pharmacy. 2 teenage boys pointed at his motorcycle, and instead of looking nervous, they looked genuinely impressed. At the gas station, the attendant, a young guy named Paulie, who usually found reasons to look anywhere except at Jack, came over and said, "That was a real good thing you did, sir." Sir. Jack hadn't been called sir by a stranger in a long time. He paid for his gas and said, "The little girl did most of it." Polly shook his head. "Way I heard it, you both did." Jack rode away and didn't let himself think too hard about that. But somewhere under his ribs, something that had been clenched tight for a long time felt just slightly less tight. Martha's diner still smelled like coffee and butter and everything good about a warm room on a cool day. The construction crew had finished the emergency kitchen repairs. The diner was open again, and it was busier than usual. People who had never come in before were sitting in booths. Martha was moving between tables like she always had, easy and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world for every single person there. When Jack walked in, she looked up and her whole face smiled. "Sit down," she said. "Coffee's fresh." He sat at his usual booth. She brought him coffee and pie without asking. Then she reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. She smoothed it flat on the table in front of him. It was from one of the regional papers. The headline read, "Hell's Angel Biker credited with helping child uncover dangerous fraud scheme." Below the headline, there was a quote from Daniel. It said, "He protected my daughter when I couldn't. I don't have words for what that means." Jack read it twice. Then he pushed the clipping back across the table toward Martha. "Don't need that," he said. Martha pushed it right back. "Yes, you do." He looked at her. She looked at him with that calm, patient expression of hers that didn't leave room for argument. Jack picked up the clipping again. He folded it slowly along the same crease. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his vest, close to his chest. He picked up his fork and started on the pie. "Good pie," he said. Martha smiled and walked away. She didn't say another word about it. She didn't need to. 3 days later, Millfield decided to throw a party. It was Martha's idea first, but once word got around, the whole town seemed to grab onto it with both hands. The community center on Birch Street was booked. A local bakery donated a cake. The high school's small brass band agreed to play. The mayor's office called Martha personally and asked if they could be involved. Martha said yes to all of it. Jack heard about the event from Emily herself. She called him on Sarah's phone Saturday morning, her voice bright and quick the way it always was when she had something important to say. "Mr. Reaper," she said, "there's going to be a party and you have to come." "A party," Jack repeated. "For me," she said, "but also for you. Martha said so." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know, kid." "You have to," Emily said simply, like it was already settled. He came. The community center had been decorated with yellow and white streamers. Folding tables lined the walls with food on them. Paper stars hung from the ceiling on thin string and turned slowly in the warm air. Someone had made a banner out of butcher paper and painted the words, "Millfield. Thanks you, Emily," in big, uneven letters that looked like a child had helped with them. Maybe one had. People filled the room. Families with small kids. Older couples. Business owners Jack recognized from Main Street. A few folks he had never seen before who had driven in from neighboring towns after reading the newspaper coverage. Jack stood near the back wall with his arms crossed. He was wearing his cleanest jeans and a dark button shirt under his vest. He had even run a comb through his hair, though it hadn't made much difference. Daniel appeared at his side, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to Jack without making a big deal of it. "You look uncomfortable," Daniel said. "I'm fine," Jack said. Daniel smiled. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "I said I'm fine." Daniel laughed quietly. They stood together, watching the room fill up. The mayor spoke first. He was a round, cheerful man named Gerald Pitts, who wore a tan jacket and smiled at everything. He talked about community and courage and the importance of paying attention. He said Emily Carter was proof that bravery didn't come with an age requirement. People clapped. Then he talked about Jack. Jack stared at the floor. Mayor Pitts called him a guardian. He said some people showed their character, Not in the big moments everyone planned for, but in the small split-second moments no one saw coming. He said Jack Morrison had stepped forward when most people would have stepped back. More clapping. Louder this time. Jack looked up. Dozens of faces were turned toward him. Not with suspicion. Not with that familiar wariness he knew so well. They were smiling. Actually smiling. At him. He didn't know what to do with that. So he just gave a single, short nod and looked back at the floor. After the mayor finished, Martha guided Emily to the front of the room. Emily was wearing a yellow dress with white buttons. Her dark hair was combed neat, and she was holding something small and flat in both hands, pressed against her chest like it was fragile. She walked right past everyone and came straight to Jack. The room got quiet. She looked up at him with those big, serious eyes and held out what she was carrying. It was a medal cut from cardboard. She had covered it in gold crayon and looped a piece of purple yarn through a hole at the top so it could hang around a neck. On the front, written carefully in her best handwriting, were 3 words. Best hero ever. I made it for you, Emily said. Jack took it with both hands. He looked at it for a long moment. The gold crayon, the careful letters, the little purple yarn loop. Something moved through his chest like a wave. He kneeled down to her level. His eyes were wet. He blinked hard. His jaw tightened. He was fighting it, and losing, and he knew it. The crowd began to applaud. The celebration ended just after 9 o'clock. People lingered the way they do after something good. Nobody wanted to be the first one to leave. They stood in small groups near the food tables, laughing and talking while the brass band packed up their instruments. Kids chased each other between the folding chairs. Martha moved through the room, refilling cups and accepting hugs from people she had known for 30 years. Jack stayed longer than he planned. He wasn't sure when that happened. One moment, he had been standing near the back wall counting the minutes until he could politely leave. Then, Emily had pulled him over to meet a little girl from her preschool class. Then Daniel had introduced him to an older man named Roy, who turned out to be an Army veteran too. They ended up talking for nearly 40 minutes about old engines and bad weather, and the strange way the military changed a person. By the time Jack shook Roy's hand and said goodnight, the room was mostly empty. Martha caught him near the door. She patted his arm with her small, warm hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, like he had done her a favor. "Thank you for the pie," he said. "Both times." She laughed. Her whole face went into it. He walked out into the cool night air, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that sat still in his chest, instead of moving around looking for trouble. Settled. That was the word. He felt settled. Daniel had driven Sarah and Emily to the celebration. The plan was to drop them home first, and then head back to his rental on the other side of town. Emily fell asleep in the back seat before they reached the end of Birch Street. Her head leaned against the window, and the handmade medal was still looped around her neck, the gold crayon catching the passing streetlights. Sarah looked back at her once and didn't say anything. She just turned forward again and looked out at the road. "She did good tonight," Daniel said quietly. "She always does," Sarah said. Her voice was soft, tired, but warm. They rode in comfortable silence the rest of the way. That was new. 3 weeks ago, a car ride between them would have been full of stiff, careful words, or no words at all. Tonight, the quiet felt easy. Daniel carried Emily inside while Sarah held the door. He laid her gently on her bed and pulled the blanket up without waking her. The medal stayed around her neck. Neither of them moved it. They stood in the hallway after, and Sarah said goodnight in a way that sounded like she meant it. Daniel nodded. He walked back through the house and out the front door into the night. The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A porch light buzzed across the road. Daniel dug his keys from his jacket pocket and looked up at his truck. He stopped walking. He stood completely still for a moment. Then he moved closer, slowly, like part of him already knew he didn't want to see what he was seeing. The windshield had a long crack running across it. Both side mirrors were snapped off and lying on the ground. The driver's side door had been scratched deeply from front to back, the kind of damage that took effort and time and intention. Daniel's hand hovered near the door handle without touching it. Across the hood, someone had written 4 words in white paint. The letters were jagged and rushed but perfectly clear. Witnesses shouldn't talk. Daniel stood in the dark street staring at those words. His breath came out slow and shallow. His keys pressed into his palm, but he didn't feel it. The warmth of the evening was gone. Just like that. The laughter, the metal, the brass band, Emily's sleeping face in the yellow dress. All of it gone. He reached for his phone and dialed Jack. The police came at 7 in the morning. 2 officers walked slowly around Daniel's truck, while a third one took photographs. The white paint on the hood caught the early light and made the words look even worse in the daytime. Bolder, somehow. More real. Sarah stood on the porch with her arms crossed tight against her chest. She watched the officers work and didn't say much. Her face was pale, and her eyes had the look of someone who hadn't slept. She hadn't. Jack had arrived 20 minutes before the police. He sat on the porch steps now with a coffee cup balanced on his knee. He hadn't slept much either. After Daniel's call the night before, he had driven straight over. By the time he got there, Sarah was already awake and standing in the doorway with her porch light on, staring at the truck from across the yard. Nobody had gone back to bed after that. Daniel stood near the officers and answered their questions in a steady voice. He described the timeline, what time the celebration ended, what time he walked out to his truck, whether he had seen anyone nearby, whether any neighbors might have noticed something. He answered every question calmly, but Jack could see the tension in his jaw and the way he kept glancing at the front door of Sarah's house. Checking. Just checking. One of the detectives from the Vince investigation showed up around 8. His name was Garrett. He was a lean, serious man in his 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook Jack's hand and spent a long time talking with Daniel near the truck. Then he came up to the porch and sat across from Sarah. "We believe this is connected to Mallory," Garrett said. He kept his voice low and even. The kind of voice that was trying not to alarm anyone while still being honest. "The timing lines up. The message is consistent with someone wanting to discourage witnesses." Sarah nodded slowly. "Is Emily in danger?" Garrett didn't answer immediately. That pause said more than any words could. "We don't have specific evidence of a direct threat toward Emily," he said carefully. "But given that she was the one who first reported the conversation she overheard, yes, we're treating her safety as a priority." Sarah's jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands. "We're recommending increased caution," Garrett continued. "No unnecessary outings. Vary your routines. Make sure she is supervised at all times." Jack listened without speaking. He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands and watched a sparrow hop along the porch railing, like the morning was completely ordinary. Inside the house, Emily was still asleep. The day moved slowly and badly. Every sound from outside made Sarah look up from whatever she was doing. Every car that slowed near the house made Daniel step to the window. Jack stayed most of the morning, and then came back in the afternoon. Nobody said out loud that they were afraid to be alone. Emily woke up cheerful and completely unaware of the truck or the investigation conversation. She ate her cereal and showed Jack a drawing she had made at the celebration. It was a picture of the two of them standing in front of the diner. He was enormous and covered in squiggly lines she said were his tattoos. She was small and yellow. "That's your dress," Jack said, pointing at the yellow shape. "And that's your muscles," she said, pointing at the squiggles. He almost smiled. After lunch, the adults rotated carefully around the house. keeping Emily within eyesight without making it obvious they were doing it. It worked well until early evening, when the sunlight turned gold and soft, and Emily asked if she could sit on the back porch. Sarah said yes. She stood at the kitchen window, where she could see the porch clearly. 5 minutes later she looked up, and the porch was empty. The back gate was open. A small orange kitten was squeezing through the gap in the fence at the far edge of the yard, and Emily was 10 steps behind it, both hands reaching forward, completely gone from the safe circle of the yard. Sarah screamed Emily's name once before she even got the back door open. The screen door banged hard against the frame as she ran across the yard. Jack heard it from the living room and was on his feet before the sound finished echoing. Daniel came from the hallway. Both of them hit the back door at the same time and spilled out into the fading light behind Sarah. Emily was 3 houses down the alley behind the fence. She was crouched in the gravel, with her hands cupped around the little orange kitten, giggling softly to herself. Completely fine. Completely unaware of the storm she had caused. Sarah reached her first. She dropped to her knees and pulled Emily into her arms so hard that the kitten scrambled free and darted under a nearby bush. "Mama," Emily said, confused. "I got him, though." Sarah didn't say anything. She just held on. Daniel stood a few feet back with his hands on his knees, catching his breath. Jack leaned against the fence post and felt his own heart still hammering. 3 minutes. She had been gone maybe 3 minutes. It had felt like so much longer. They brought Emily back inside without explaining why everyone looked so shaken. Sarah gave the kitten its food and sent Emily upstairs to wash up before dinner. The moment Emily's feet disappeared up the stairs, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the surface, like she needed something solid to hold on to. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "She's okay," Daniel finally said. "This time," Sarah said quietly. The call came the following morning. Detective Garrett arrived at the house just after 9. He sat at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him, and the same careful voice he always used when the news wasn't good. The prosecutors had reviewed the evidence gathered so far. The case against Vince Mallory was growing in scope, Garrett explained, but several key pieces still had gaps. Financial records were incomplete. One witness had already backed out. Without stronger, direct evidence linking Vince to the gas line tampering specifically, the fraud charges alone might not be enough to guarantee a conviction. Emily, Garrett said gently, remained their strongest witness to what happened inside the diner. A 5-year-old girl. Sarah stared at the table after Garrett left. Daniel stood at the counter with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the window over the sink. Jack sat in the chair nearest the door and turned his coffee cup around and around in his hands without drinking from it. "So, all of it," Sarah said. Her voice was flat and tired. "Everything that happened, and it might not even matter." Daniel turned around. "It matters. It happened. You know what I mean." She looked up at him. Her eyes were red but dry. She was past the crying stage and into something quieter and harder. "I brought him into our lives. I did that. Emily was the one who figured out he was dangerous, and she's 5 years old, and I didn't even see it coming." Daniel opened his mouth and then closed it again. "I should have seen it," Sarah said. "I should have known." "Sarah, don't." Her voice was sharp but not mean. "Just tired. I know what you're going to say, and I can't hear it right now." Daniel looked at the window again. The muscle along his jaw moved once. He didn't say anything else. Jack set his cup down on the table. He looked at the two of them and thought about all the miles he had put between himself and other people over the years. The quiet apartment. The empty road. The way it was easier to ride away than to stay. He had stayed this time, and he still hadn't been able to fix it. Emily was upstairs with her kitten, and her drawings, and her big trusting eyes, and the people who were supposed to protect her were sitting at a kitchen table falling apart around a coffee cup, and a folder full of papers that weren't enough. Jack didn't say anything. He didn't have anything to say. Jack sat on the edge of his bed that night and stared at the floor. His boots were still on. He hadn't bothered taking them off when he got home. He had just sat down on the mattress and stayed there while the room got darker around him, and the sounds of the neighborhood settled into quiet. On the dresser across the room, there was an old photograph in a cracked wooden frame. A little girl with pigtails and a gap where her 2 front teeth used to be. She was squinting into the sun and laughing at something off to the side of the camera. Her name had been Rosie. She had been 7 years old in that picture. She had been 8 when she died. Jack had been 12. Old enough to know better, people had said. Old enough to watch out for her. They had been playing near the old creek behind their neighborhood when the bank gave way. He had pulled her out. He had tried. But the water was moving fast, and the mud was deep, and by the time help arrived, it was too late. His mother had never said it was his fault out loud. She hadn't needed to. Jack looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked back down at the floor. He had spent 33 years keeping his distance from people. It was easier that way. Safer. Not safer for him exactly, but safer for them. That was how it felt in the dark hours of the night, when his brain started running through everything he had ever done wrong, and everything he had failed to prevent. Emily's face came into his mind. The way she had grabbed his vest at the diner, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The way she called him Mr. Reaper without any hesitation, like it was a perfectly reasonable name for a person to have. The way she looked up at him with those steady brown eyes that didn't hold any fear of him at all. He pressed his palms against his knees and breathed out slowly. He had stepped in because she was scared. That part had been simple. But somewhere between the diner and the fishing trip and the handmade medal around his neck, it had stopped being simple. It had become something else, something that felt warm and terrifying at the same time. And now, Vince was still out there. The case was falling apart. Sarah and Daniel were cracking under the pressure. And Jack was sitting alone in a dark room in his boots, wondering if everyone he got close to ended up worse off for it. The thought sat heavy in his chest. He finally pulled off his boots and lay back on the bed without getting under the covers. He stared at the ceiling until his eyes closed. He was in the kitchen the next morning when he heard a knock at the front door. Emily was standing on his porch with her kitten tucked under one arm and a piece of folded paper in her free hand. She was wearing a yellow raincoat, even though it wasn't raining. Daniel's truck was parked at the curb. "Hi, Mr. Reaper," she said. Jack looked past her at Daniel, who gave a small shrug from the walkway, like he wanted Jack to know this had been entirely Emily's idea. Jack stepped back and held the door open. "Come on in, then." Emily walked inside and set the kitten carefully on the floor and held the paper out to him. It was a drawing, crayon on the back of what looked like an old grocery receipt. There was a figure in black with a big motorcycle and a smaller figure next to it with yellow hair. Above them, in unsteady letters that took up most of the page, it read, "Heroes don't quit." Jack looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "My teacher says real heroes keep going even when it's hard," Emily said matter-of-factly. "I thought you should have that." Jack crouched down to her level. Something in his chest that had been very tight all night quietly loosened. Daniel and Sarah sat at Jack's kitchen table later that afternoon with a stack of papers between them, and voices low with frustration. Detective Ruiz had stopped by an hour earlier to give them an update. He was a quiet man with tired eyes, and a notepad he kept clicking open and closed. He had explained that the evidence they had collected so far was thin. Circumstantial, he had called it. That meant they could point at Vince and say he probably did it, but probably wasn't good enough to put a man in front of a judge and win. Without stronger proof, Vince's lawyer would pick the case apart. Sarah had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. Daniel had read the same page of the report 3 times without turning it over. Jack leaned against the counter near the window, with his arms crossed, and said very little. Detective Ruiz was still there. He sat across from Daniel with his notepad on the table and went through the list of what they needed. A direct connection between Vince and the gas line. A paper trail. Something with his name on it that wasn't easy to explain away. They didn't have any of that yet. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, just around the corner from the kitchen. She had her coloring book open in front of her and a tin of crayons spilled out beside her. The kitten was curled up near her knee, already asleep. The voices from the kitchen were too grown up and too heavy to interest her much, so she had mostly tuned them out the way children do when adults talk too long about things that sound like trouble. She picked up a brown crayon and pressed it to the page. She had been working on the same picture for a while now. It had started as a horse in a field, but she had gotten bored with that and started drawing other things around the edges. A tree, a house, a motorcycle that was supposed to look like Jack's, but came out a little lopsided. Then, she started drawing from memory. That was something she liked to do sometimes, just pulling pictures out of her head and putting them on paper. Her kindergarten teacher had told her mother once that Emily had an unusual memory for details. Sarah had smiled and nodded, but Emily didn't fully understand what unusual meant in that context. She just knew that things she saw tended to stay with her like photographs. She thought about Vince's papers. She had seen them once on the kitchen counter at home, spread out in a fan like he was proud of them. He had been on the phone and not paying attention to her. She had stood there looking at them for a minute before her mother called her into the other room. There had been a picture on some of the pages. A small picture in the corner. A kind of symbol or badge. She picked up a dark blue crayon and started drawing it on the blank margin of the coloring book page. A circle first. Then something inside the circle. It had been some kind of shape with letters underneath it. She drew slowly and carefully, pressing her tongue to the corner of her mouth, the way she always did when she was concentrating hard. She didn't know why she was drawing it. It just came to her, and so she put it down. She finished it, and sat back a little to look at it. Detective Ruiz walked out of the kitchen just then, heading toward the front door. He paused when he passed the living room doorway and glanced down at Emily, the way adults do when they are being polite. Then he stopped. He crouched down slowly. His eyes were fixed on the drawing in the corner of her coloring book page. "Hey there," he said quietly. "Can I see that for a second?" Emily looked up at him. She held the coloring book out without hesitation. Detective Ruiz stared at the small symbol she had drawn. His expression shifted. The tired look in his eyes went somewhere else, and something sharper took its place. He looked back toward the kitchen. "Mr. Carter," he called out. His voice was steady but urgent. "You need to come see this." The morning came in gray and slow. Jack sat on the front porch steps of Sarah's house with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand. The air smelled like wet grass and mud. A few birds were calling somewhere in the trees across the street, but everything else was quiet. Too quiet for a morning that felt this heavy. He had barely slept. He kept thinking about that drawing. That small blue circle Emily had pressed into the corner of her coloring book with a crayon. Such a little thing. Such a careful, deliberate little thing, drawn by a 5-year-old who had no idea what she was doing, or why it mattered. Detective Ruiz had stared at it for a long time, before carefully tearing the page free from the coloring book and sliding it into a clear plastic sleeve he pulled from his jacket pocket. He had thanked Emily very gently, told her she had done a good job, and then walked out the front door with his phone already at his ear. He had not said much else, just that they would follow up in the morning. That was last night. Now it was morning, and the phone had not rung yet. The front door opened behind Jack, and Daniel stepped out. He was carrying his own coffee, and his hair was still flat on one side from sleeping on Sarah's couch. He lowered himself onto the step beside Jack without saying anything at first. The two of them just sat there, looking out at the quiet street. "You think it's going to lead somewhere?" Daniel said finally. Jack turned the paper cup slowly in his hands. "I think that little girl doesn't draw things for no reason." Daniel nodded and looked down at his coffee. Inside, Sarah was making breakfast. They could hear the soft sounds of it through the screen door. The clink of a pan, the low hiss of butter hitting heat. Emily was still asleep. She had stayed up a little too late the night before, asking Jack questions about why the detective wanted her drawing and whether she was going to get it back. Jack had told her they would get her a whole new coloring book. She had thought about that seriously for a moment, and then asked if it could have horses in it. He had said yes. That had been enough for her. The phone on Jack's knee buzzed at 9:30. He looked down at the screen. Detective Ruiz. He answered it before the second buzz finished. "Morrison," Ruiz said. His voice was different this morning, cleaner, quicker. "We got something. The symbol your girl drew is a registered business logo. Small shell company out of the county, supposed to be a property management outfit. We pulled the registration records this morning, and one of the names attached to it matched a known alias Vince has used before. We ran it back through our database." Jack stood up from the step. Daniel looked at him immediately. "The alias connected to a storage unit," Ruiz continued. "Rented 6 months ago just outside the county line. We got a warrant this morning and executed it about 40 minutes ago." Jack pressed the phone harder against his ear. "And?" There was a brief pause on the line. Not the kind of pause that meant bad news. The kind that meant the person on the other end was choosing their words because the words actually mattered. "It was full," Ruiz said. "Filing boxes, folders, fake insurance claims going back almost 3 years, policy documents with forged signatures, photographs of properties, incident reports that were never filed with any actual agency." He paused again. "We're talking about a serious operation, Morrison. Multiple businesses, multiple counties. This isn't just the diner." Jack exhaled slowly. He turned to look at Daniel. Daniel had already risen from the step and was watching his face. Jack lowered the phone for a moment and looked his friend in the eye. "They found it," he said. "They found everything." Daniel's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in relief, the kind of relief that comes after holding your breath for far too long. From inside the house, they could smell the breakfast Sarah was cooking. For the first time in days, it smelled like hope. By early afternoon, the quiet outside Sarah's house had been replaced by something entirely different. 2 police cruisers were parked at the curb. A plain gray sedan sat behind them with county plates and a long antenna running up the back window. Detective Ruiz was standing in the front yard with his jacket open and a radio clipped to his belt. He was talking to 2 other officers, whose names Jack did not know yet. Their voices were low and fast. Inside the house, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Emily on her lap. Emily was working on a new coloring book. Horses, just like Jack had promised. She was pressing a bright orange crayon very carefully along the outline of a mare's mane, and was not paying much attention to the adults moving around her. That was fine. That was good. Jack stood near the living room window watching the officers outside. Daniel stood beside him with his arms crossed and his jaw set. "They're moving fast," Daniel said quietly. "They have to," Jack said. "A man like Vince doesn't sit still once he knows people are looking." Ruiz came through the front door a few minutes later. He pulled a chair away from the table and sat down across from Sarah without ceremony. He had a folder under his arm, and he set it flat on the table, though he didn't open it yet. "Here is where we are," Ruiz said. His voice was calm but deliberate. "What we found in that storage unit this morning is significant. Enough to support multiple charges, but evidence alone doesn't mean much if the subject isn't in custody." He looked at Sarah directly. "We need Vince Mallory in handcuffs." Sarah nodded. She had her hand resting lightly on Emily's back. Her face was steady, but her eyes gave her away. "Do you know where he might go?" Ruiz asked. "Family, friends, anywhere he ever mentioned, even in passing." Sarah was quiet for a moment. She stared at the table and thought hard. "He talked about a cousin once, up north somewhere. I don't remember a name. He mentioned it during a drive. He said something about growing up near the state line." Ruiz wrote something down. "He had a truck," Sarah added. "A dark green one, older. He kept a lot of stuff in it, like he was always ready to leave somewhere." Ruiz nodded slowly. "That tracks with what we know about him." Jack cleared his throat from across the room. "He's going to stick to back roads if he's smart. He won't risk the highway. Too many cameras." Ruiz looked over at him. "You know this area well." "Well enough," Jack said. Ruiz studied him for a moment. Then he nodded once. "I want both of you with me when we go over the route maps. You know the roads around here better than anyone on my team does." Daniel dropped his arms from his chest. "Whatever you need." They moved to the dining room table, where Ruiz spread out a wide printed map of the county and the 3 counties surrounding it. His partner, a younger officer named Tess Briggs, with sharp eyes and a quiet manner, stood at the edge of the table and pointed out the main corridors heading north and east. The tip had come in about an hour after the storage unit was found. A gas station attendant, 2 towns over, had reported a man matching Vince's description paying in cash for a full tank and a bag of food. He had been driving a dark green truck. He had not spoken much. He had left heading northeast on a county road that ran parallel to the main highway. That put him roughly 40 miles away and moving. Ruiz traced the road with his finger. "If he stays on this route, he has 3 likely options for crossing out of the county. Here, or here." He tapped each intersection in turn. Jack leaned over the map and studied it carefully. He knew these roads. He had ridden nearly all of them over the years, alone, in all kinds of weather, at all kinds of hours. "This one," he said, and placed his finger on the second crossing. "If he wants to stay invisible, that's the one he takes." The morning came in gray and cold. Jack had not slept much. He had sat in his old recliner for most of the night, with a cup of coffee that went cold on the side table, and the quiet of his house pressing in around him. He kept thinking about the map, about that road heading northeast, about Vince Mallory sitting behind the wheel of a dark green truck somewhere out there, running. His phone buzzed at 6:40 in the morning. It was Ruiz. "We have him on a traffic camera. He stopped at a motel off Route 9 last night. We're moving now. I want you and Daniel to stay back, but I want you close." Jack was already pulling on his boots. He called Daniel. Daniel picked up on the first ring. He had not slept either. They met at the end of Sarah's street 20 minutes later. The morning air smelled like damp pavement and cut grass. Jack's motorcycle sat at the curb, and he stood beside it with his helmet under his arm. Daniel pulled up in a borrowed car and climbed out, looking tired and tense. Neither man said much. There wasn't much to say. Ruiz had 2 units already staged near the motel. He wanted Jack and Daniel a block back, out of the way, available if they were needed to confirm identification. Nothing more than that. Jack understood the instructions. He agreed to them. But as they drove out along Route 9 with the fields rolling flat on either side, and the pale sky opening up ahead, something was tightening in Jack's chest. He knew what it was. He had felt it before, years ago, in situations where his hands had made the decision before his head could catch up. It was anger, clean and sharp and old. He thought about the threatening message left on Daniel's truck. He thought about the night Emily had gone missing for those terrifying minutes in the backyard. He thought about Sarah sitting at that kitchen table trying to hold everything together. He thought about all of it, and the anger got hotter. Then he thought about Emily's face, the way she had looked up at him in the diner, small and scared, and completely certain that he was safe. The way she had placed that folded note in his hand, like she had no doubt at all that he would know what to do with it. The handmade medal around his neck that he had quietly put back on that morning without even thinking about it. Best hero ever. He breathed out slowly. A hero didn't let the anger drive. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. Ruiz's voice crackled over the radio. Subject's vehicle is confirmed in the motel lot. We are moving in. Jack pulled to the side of the road a block away. Daniel stopped behind him. They both got out and stood on the gravel shoulder and watched. It happened quickly and without drama. Two cruisers rolled into the motel lot from opposite sides. Officers moved to the door of room 7 with calm and purpose. There was a pause. Then the door opened. Vince Mallory stepped out into the gray morning light. He looked smaller than Jack had imagined. His hair was uncombed. He was wearing the same jacket from the night of the diner. He looked left and then right, and he seemed to understand immediately that there was nowhere to go. He did not run. He raised his hands slowly, and one of the officers moved forward and guided his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. Jack stood on the gravel shoulder with his arms at his sides and watched it happen. His hands had been balled into fists at some point during the last 60 seconds. He hadn't noticed until now. He opened them slowly, pressed them flat against his thighs. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't cross that block of distance, even though part of him wanted to. He just stood there and let the law do what the law was supposed to do. Daniel exhaled beside him, long and ragged, like he had been holding it in for weeks. "It's over," Daniel said. Jack nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Several months passed. Vince Mallory stood before a judge in the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning and was convicted on 11 counts of insurance fraud, criminal conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. The evidence from the storage unit had been more than enough. The prosecutor told the court that one piece of evidence had broken the case wide open: a child's drawing of a company logo done in orange crayon. The courtroom had been quiet when the verdict was read. Sarah had reached across and taken Daniel's hand without thinking about it. Daniel had let her. Emily had been at school that morning, kept safely away from all of it, and that had been everyone's decision together. Jack had sat in the back row and said nothing. He had worn a clean shirt and combed his hair and left his helmet outside. When the gavel came down, he had simply stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out into the sunshine. That had been enough. In the weeks that followed, the town of Millfield moved forward the way small towns do, slowly, steadily, and together. The diner was repaired from the ground up. Martha oversaw every inch of it with the focused energy of a woman half her age, pointing at walls and tasting sauces and telling the contractors exactly where she wanted things placed and why. New countertops went in. Fresh paint covered the walls in warm yellow and soft white. The kitchen was rebuilt properly and passed every inspection with no problems at all. Daniel and Sarah worked out a custody arrangement that was calm and reasonable. It hadn't happened overnight. There had been hard conversations and moments where old hurt flared up between them. But they had both kept showing up. They had both kept choosing Emily over everything else. And that had made the difference. Emily started sleeping through the night again. She started laughing more easily. She brought her kitten to Jack's house one Saturday afternoon and insisted the kitten needed to meet his motorcycle. Jack had let the kitten sit on the seat. He had taken a photo. He kept it stuck to his refrigerator with a piece of tape. Life had a different feel to it now. Not perfect, not wrapped up neat and clean, but different in a way that settled into his bones and stayed there. People in town waved at him from their cars. The woman who ran the hardware store had started saving a parking spot near the entrance because she knew he came in every other week. A few of the kids from the elementary school had started asking Martha about the big biker man from the newspaper. Martha always told them he was a friend of hers. That still caught him off guard every single time he heard it. The grand reopening of the diner fell on a Saturday in October when the air had that first real bite of cold in it, and the trees along Main Street had gone gold and red. Martha had hung a banner above the door that read, "Welcome back, Millfield." Tables were covered in simple white cloths. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pie moved through the room like something alive. Jack arrived not knowing what to expect. He had put on his cleanest vest and his best boots, and told himself it was just a diner reopening, and he should not make a big deal out of it. He pushed open the door. The room was full. Neighbors and regulars and faces he recognized from the celebration months ago. Daniel was near the window with Emily on his shoulders. Sarah stood beside them, smiling at something Emily had just said. Half the town seemed to have shown up, filling every seat and spilling into the small space near the counter. Then, Martha stepped forward from the far wall with both hands clasped in front of her, and a look on her face that Jack could not quite read. "I have been waiting to do this for a long time," she said clearly, loud enough for the room to hear. She reached up and lifted a cloth away from the wall beside the main counter. Beneath it hung a framed photograph. Jack's breath caught. It was him, kneeling down on the diner floor with Emily standing beside him, both of them looking at each other. Emily's hand was resting on his arm. He hadn't known anyone had taken it. In the photo, his face was open in a way he rarely let it be. Soft, unguarded, real. Below the frame, mounted on a small piece of polished wood, was a plaque. It read, "Heroes don't always look like heroes." The room was quiet for one full second. Then the applause started. Jack stood in the middle of it with his hands at his sides, and his jaw tight, and his eyes burning in a way he was not going to explain to anyone. He pressed his lips together and nodded because it was the only thing he could manage. Emily wiggled down from Daniel's shoulders and ran across the diner with her sneakers squeaking on the clean floor. She threw both arms around Jack's waist and squeezed hard. He put his hand on top of her head. "Hey, small stuff," he said roughly. She pulled back and looked up at him with that expression she had, the one that made him feel like she could see straight through every wall he had ever built. "I have something for you," she said very seriously. She sat down on the floor right there in the middle of the diner and pulled off her shoe. Someone nearby laughed. Then someone else did. Then the whole room understood what was happening, and the laughter spread warm and wide through the space. Emily unfolded a small piece of paper that had been tucked carefully inside. She stood back up and held it out to him with both hands. Jack took it. He unfolded it slowly. In careful, uneven letters that only a 5-year-old could write, it read, "Thank you for saving me first." He read it twice. Then he folded it gently and pressed it flat against his palm. He could not speak for a moment. The words were just gone. All of them. Emily was still looking up at him, patient and steady and sure of him in that way she had always been, right from the very beginning. Jack crouched down to her level. He looked at her small face and thought about the diner on that rainy afternoon. The note in the shoe, the way she had grabbed onto his vest and trusted him completely before she even knew his name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me." She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable thing and hugged him again. He held on. Around him the diner filled with noise and movement and warmth. Martha was already behind the counter pouring coffee. Daniel and Sarah were talking to neighbors near the window. The smell of fresh pie moved through the air. Someone put music on low in the background. Jack slowly stood up. He looked around the room, at every face, at the photograph on the wall, at the little girl now chasing her father between the tables, while her mother called after her to slow down. He had come into this town alone. He had sat in a booth and eaten pie and expected nothing. He looked around at all of it, and for the first time in more years than he could count, Jack Morrison felt completely at home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.